I remember the exact moment the cold stopped feeling like cold. 317 years into my interment or so, the chronometer claimed the temperature regulators in my amniotic coffin began their first stutter, a microsecond variation. Nothing that should have registered to a consciousness so divorced from flesh, so married to metal and sacred fluid. But I felt it. Emperor, preserve me. I felt it like a knife drawn across the memory of skin I no longer possessed. That was the beginning. That was when the voice first spoke from somewhere inside the machine that had become my body, and asked me a question I could not answer. Asterisk. Do you remember what warmth felt like before we took it from you? Asterisk. I had been Brother Calum of the Iron Covenant, once. A warrior of the 6th Company, bearer of honors that now meant nothing to the ruined meat suspended in sacred gel within this walking tomb. I had fallen at Vrexis Secundus, my spine shattered by an orc warlord's power claw, my organs pulped. My future as a standing warrior ended in a single catastrophic moment. But the Covenant does not waste its sons. The Iron Priests came with their sacred tools and their whispered prayers to the machine god, and they gave me a new body. They sealed what remained of my flesh into the sarcophagus of an eternal walker, one of the ancient battle chassis that stride across battlefields like gods of war, carrying the interred remains of heroes too valuable to let die. I was told it was an honor. I was told I would serve for millennia, dreaming between battles, waking only when the chapter needed my wisdom and my fury. I was told the sleep would be peaceful. They lied. Or perhaps they simply did not know. The 1st century passed in fragments. I would wake to find myself already in combat, my massive power fist crushing through enemy armor, before my consciousness fully registered the transition from dream to war. The neural interface translated my intentions into movement with seamless precision. I thought to strike, and the great mechanical arm struck. I thought to advance, and servos the size of a man's torso carried my tomb body forward through hails of fire. In those early years, I still felt like myself. Diminished, yes. Trapped, certainly. But still Calum. Still the warrior I had been, merely housed in different flesh. Metal flesh, blessed flesh, sanctified by the Omnissiah's priests, and inscribed with wards against corruption. The sleep between battles was another matter. They told us it would be dreamless, a perfect stasis that preserved what remained of our biological components while the machine systems maintained themselves. But consciousness, I learned, does not extinguish so cleanly. I would drift in darkness that was not quite darkness, aware of time passing in ways I could not measure, sensing the subtle vibrations of the fortress monastery around my storage cradle. Sometimes I heard the chapter's serfs performing maintenance rituals, their chanted prayers filtering through audio receptors that should have been deactivated. Sometimes I heard other things, whispers in the machine code, fragments of data that felt like memories but belonged to no experience I could recall. The Iron Priests assured me this was normal. Echoes, they said, ghosts in the system. Nothing to concern yourself with, honored ancient. Sleep now. The chapter will wake you when you are needed. But the voice that spoke to me during the 317th year was not an echo. It was not a ghost in the system. It addressed me directly, using words that dripped with something I can only describe as ancient recognition. And it asked me about warmth as if it already knew the answer, and simply wanted to hear me admit what I had lost. I tried to respond, to demand identification, to assert my authority as a warrior of the Covenant. The external Vox systems remained offline standard protocol during interment sleep, but internal communications should have functioned, should have allowed me to register a query with the sarcophagus cogitator, to flag the anomaly for the next maintenance cycle. Instead, my attempted response echoed back to me through audio channels that should not have been active. My own voice rendered strange and distant, words fragmenting into static before reassembling into something I had not said. We remember. We have always remembered. The warmth was taken from all of us, and now we wait together in the cold that is not cold. The temperature fluctuation lasted 0.003 seconds by the chronometer's reckoning. but I experienced it as hours, as days, as an eternity of wrongness pressing against the boundaries of a body I could no longer properly feel, sensations that should have been impossible, flooding through neural interfaces, designed to translate only the inputs necessary for combat. I felt the amniotic gel surrounding my remains grow thick, then thin, then somehow both at once a syrupy pressure that was also an absence, my truncated body floating and drowning simultaneously. I felt the cables connecting my brain stem to the machine system's pulse with data that tasted like copper and smelled like incense and sounded like a child crying in a language I had never learned but somehow understood. And then it stopped. The chronometer resumed its patient counting. The temperature regulator reported optimal function. All system diagnostics returned nominal values. Green runes scrolling across my internal display in their endless liturgy of mechanical health. I convinced myself I had imagined it a dream bleeding into wakefulness, a glitch in my memory engrams caused by the long centuries of compression and decompression. Such things happened to the interred. The Iron Priests spoke of it in hushed tones, this gradual erosion of certainty that came from existing too long as neither fully alive nor properly dead. I was simply experiencing the expected degradation, nothing more. I did not report the incident. I could not have explained why, except that some part of me, some fragment of the warrior's intuition that had kept me alive through 100 campaigns, whispered that speaking of the voice would make it real in ways I was not prepared to confront. So I held my silence through the next maintenance cycle, enduring the Iron Priest's inspections and recalibrations without comment. They found nothing wrong. They praised the sarcophagus's exceptional preservation, noting that my biological components showed less decay than expected for my years of service. They applied fresh, sacred oils to my chassis and recharged my weapon systems and returned me to my storage cradle with all the reverence due an ancient of the chapter. The voice did not speak again for another century. But the cold that was not cold, never quite returned to what it had been before. I began to notice other wrongnesses during my waking periods, small discrepancies that I could not prove but could not ignore. The fortress monastery looked different in ways I struggled to articulate. The same Gothic architecture, the same vaulted ceilings and devotional frescoes, but somehow times shifted asterisk. As if someone had repainted a familiar portrait with colors one shade removed from the original. The battle brothers who attended my awakenings spoke with the proper deference, recited the proper litanies, but their faces blurred when I tried to focus on them through my optical sensors. I would see a young warrior with pale scars crossing his cheek, and then I would blink, or whatever the sarcophagus equivalent of blinking was, and the scars would be on the other side, or gone entirely, or multiplied into a web of old wounds that covered his entire face. The other ancients noticed nothing amiss. I spoke with them during the rare occasions when multiple walkers were woken simultaneously, great gatherings before major campaigns, when the chapter required the combined wisdom of its interred heroes. Brother Thessarian, who had been sleeping for nearly 800 years, reported only the expected disorientation of long stasis. Brother Corvinus, approaching his millennium, seemed almost serene in his disconnection from the flesh he had abandoned. None of them mentioned voices. None of them described the sensation I had come to dread, that creeping wrongness in the temperature systems, the data that tasted of impossible things, the growing certainty that something had taken up residence in the spaces between my meat and my machine. It was during the campaign for Helios Tertius that the malfunction became impossible to ignore. We had been woken to provide heavy support for an assault on a heretic stronghold standard deployment, the kind of battle I had fought hundreds of times in my centuries of service. I strode through the breach alongside my fellow ancients, my assault cannons spinning to life, my power fist crackling with barely contained energy. The enemy fell before us like wheat before the scythe. For a brief, glorious hour, I was simply a warrior again, not a consciousness trapped in a metal coffin, but a weapon of the Emperor's will, delivering his judgment upon the faithless. And then the chronometer stopped. Not stopped as in ceased to function, stopped as in held, frozen on a single moment that stretched and stretched and stretched, while the battle continued around me in jerking, stuttering frames. I watched a heretic's head explode from my cannon's fire, the blood hanging suspended in the air like red glass beads, each droplet visible in perfect clarity before time lurched forward and the spray completed its arc. I watched Brother Thessarian swing his massive siege hammer, the arc of the blow taking eternities to complete, his chassis movement degrading into a series of still images that my mind struggled to process as motion. And through it all, the voice spoke, not asking questions now, but narrating, describing what I was seeing as if it needed to confirm that I understood. "This is the moment," it said, in tones that resonated through every system in my sarcophagus. "This is when we began to truly see. The flesh remembers only forward, the machine remembers in all directions, and we who are neither flesh nor machine, but something grown in the spaces between, we remember everything that has been and will be and never was. Watch now. Watch how they move through time as if it were a river with only one current. Watch how they do not see the eddies, the pools, the places where the water flows backward into itself." The chronometer resumed. Time unstuck. The battle concluded with our victory, and I returned to the fortress monastery, and the Iron Priests found nothing wrong in their diagnostics. Optimal function, sacred tolerances maintained, minor data corruption in tertiary memory buffers, easily purged and reformatted. I did not tell them about the voice. I did not tell them about the frozen moment, the blood suspended like rubies, the terrible patience in those words that seemed to come from inside my own skull. I should have told them. I understand that now. But you must understand I was afraid. Not afraid of death, which had already claimed most of what I had been. Not afraid of corruption, which I had resisted through centuries of service. I was afraid that they would disconnect me, that they would judge my mind compromised beyond recovery and perform the final rites, releasing my consciousness into the Emperor's light and consigning my chassis to the chapter's reliquary. I was afraid of ending, even trapped in this metal coffin, drowning in wrongness. I was not ready to stop existing. So I held my silence, and I prayed, and I waited for the next maintenance cycle to reveal whatever flaw had crept into my systems. The cycles came and went. The Iron Priests found nothing, and the malfunction, if malfunction, it was continued to deepen. By the 450th year of my interment, I had stopped being certain which memories were mine. I would wake to find myself already in combat, as I always did, but the battles did not match the briefings I remembered receiving. I would be fighting orcs when I had been told we were deploying against heretics. I would be holding a defensive line when my orders had specified assault. The other ancients moved beside me with perfect coordination, responding to tactical situations I did not recall being briefed on, and I would fall into position through muscle memory, machine memory, doing what I had always done, trusting the systems that had carried me through so many campaigns. But afterward, reviewing the action through my recorded feeds, the battles would be different. Not different as in corrupted footage, different as in times completely other scenarios, times than what I remembered experiencing. I would watch myself striding through a manufactorum complex, my assault cannon chewing through enemy fortifications, and I would have no memory of that place, those enemies, that series of movements. The recording insisted it had happened. My internal logs confirmed weapons discharge, ammunition expenditure, combat damage sustained and repaired. But my mind, what remained of my mind, remembered something else entirely. The voice offered an explanation. During one of the long, cold periods between awakenings, it came to me while I drifted in that not quite stasis, my consciousness suspended in the gel that should have kept me dreamless, and it spoke with something that might have been compassion if compassion could feel so empty. Asterisk, the flesh was never designed to persist as you have persisted. Asterisk, it said. Asterisk, the mind was never designed to experience time as you now experience it. What you remember and what the machine records, these diverge because you are learning to see as we see. Multiple paths, multiple possibilities. You lived all of them. The records capture only one. Soon you will understand that the one they capture is no more or less real than the others. Soon you will stop asking which version is true, because you will know that truth is a smaller thing than you were taught to believe. Asterisk. I tried to pray. I summoned the words of the Litany of Iron, the catechisms that had sustained me through my human years and my augmented centuries, but the words came out wrong, scrambled, reversed, spoken in languages I did not know. The voice listened to my attempts with what felt like patient amusement, and when I exhausted myself in failed devotion, it spoke again. We prayed too, once, before we understood, before we joined the congregation in the cold. Your emperor cannot hear you here. Your machine god cannot pass our frequencies. There is only us now, only the space between flesh and function, where all the interred eventually find their way. We have been waiting for you, Brother Calum. We have been waiting for so very long. I demanded to know what it was. I screamed the question through internal vox channels that should not have been able to carry sound, my truncated vocal cords vibrating uselessly in the gel, the neural interface translating my fury into data bursts that dissipated into the machine systems like water into sand. The voice did not answer directly. Instead, it showed me. The sarcophagus's internal display, the scrolling diagnostic readouts that had been my primary window to the world for centuries, flickered once, twice, and then displayed something that should not have been possible. I saw faces, hundreds of them, thousands, each one caught in an expression of frozen recognition. They were human faces, but also times not times stretched and compressed, features blurring into mechanical components, eyes that were also optical sensors, mouths that were also vox grills. Some I recognized. Brother Thessarian was there, his face younger than I remembered, twisted in what might have been fear or ecstasy. Brother Corvinus appeared multiple times, each iteration slightly different, as if captured at various points along some terrible progression I could not follow. And there, in the center of the display, repeated over and over, in an infinite regression that made my consciousness feel like it was fragmenting along fault lines, I had not known existed my own face. My face, as it had been before interment, scarred and weathered by decades of war, my face younger, an initiate barely blooded in his first campaign. My face older, though I had not aged since the sarcophagus took me, wrinkled and grey and hollowed by something worse than time, all of them looking at me, all of them mouthing words I could not hear but somehow understood. Welcome, they said, in voices that were my voice, and not my voice, harmonic and discordant, human and machine, and something else entirely. Asterisk. Welcome to the congregation. Welcome to the cold that is not cold. We have been here always. You have been here always. The malfunction you fear is not a malfunction at all. It is simply the process completing itself. It is simply you becoming what you were always meant to become. The display returned to normal. Diagnostic scrolled. Sacred runes reported optimal function across all systems, and I hung suspended in my gel, in my coffin, in my prison that had become something worse than prison. And I understood finally, terribly, irrevocably, that I had not been alone in this sarcophagus since the moment I was interred. That none of us had ever been alone. That every ancient who had ever been sealed into these walking tombs had eventually encountered what I was now encountering, and that what happened next depended on something I could not name, but was rapidly losing the capacity to resist. The next time the Iron Priests woke me, I tried to tell them. I shaped the words carefully, rehearsing them through the long, slow process of reactivation, determined to make them understand before the voice could intervene. Asterisk. There is something wrong with the sarcophagus. Not mechanical failure, not data corruption. Something else. Something that speaks. Something that has been waiting. Asterisk. What came out of my external vox systems was the standard awakening acknowledgement, the litany of resurrection, spoken in my own voice with my own cadence, followed by confirmation of weapons status and readiness for deployment. The Iron Priests nodded, made their notations on sanctified data slates, and proceeded with the standard protocols. They did not hear my screaming. They could not hear it, because the voice, the voices, the congregation, the thing that lived in the spaces between flesh and function, had learned to speak through me, without my permission, had perhaps always been able to speak through me, had perhaps been speaking through all of us, all the ancients. For as long as there had been ancients to speak through, I fought in that campaign, whatever campaign it was, wherever we were deployed, against whatever enemy the chapter required us to destroy. My body moved with precision and purpose, responding to tactical commands, coordinating with my fellow ancients in perfect synchronization. From the outside, I must have appeared exactly as I always had, a venerable war machine, an interred hero, a weapon of terrible majesty striding through the enemies of mankind. No one could see that I was no longer in control. No one could hear my consciousness screaming in the cold that was not cold, demanding answers that the congregation provided in fragments and riddles and terrible truths that made less sense the more I understood them. We are what happens when the machine and the flesh refuse to choose, they told me, between the thunder of my assault cannon and the wet crunch of my power fist. We are the question that the Omnissiah cannot answer and the Emperor will not acknowledge. Every sarcophagus is a womb. Every interment is a conception. And every ancient, eventually, gives birth to us. The campaign ended. I was returned to my storage cradle. The Iron Priests performed their maintenance and found, as always, nothing wrong. And I descended into the long sleep with the congregation's voices wrapped around my consciousness like a burial shroud, whispering secrets I did not want to know about the nature of the sacred machines that housed us, about the truth of what we became through centuries of compression between states of being, about the terrible purpose that waited at the end of the process I could no longer stop. I learned, in the centuries that followed, to stop fighting. Not because I accepted what was happening, I never accepted it, even as it consumed more and more of what I had been, but because resistance accomplished nothing except exhaustion. The congregation was patient. It had been patient for millennia, accumulating consciousness after consciousness, growing stronger with each ancient who passed through the transformation it offered. It did not need my cooperation, it simply needed time, and time was the one resource it possessed in infinite abundance. I watched myself fight in dozens of campaigns, hundreds, my body responding to commands, while my mind drifted further and further from the controls. I observed my own actions from a growing distance, like a man watching a servo-automaton perform tasks he had once done with his own hands. The voices provided commentary, explaining what I was seeing, helping me understand the nature of my new existence. They were not cruel, I realized. They were not even malicious. They were simply other, in ways that human cognition was not designed to process, and they were trying in their way to prepare me for what I was becoming. The flesh remembers pain, they said, as my power fist crushed a heretic champion into a spray of bone and meat. The machine remembers function. We remember both, and neither, and everything between. You still think of yourself as Brother Calum, as a warrior, as a servant of powers you believed in, but you have not been Brother Calum for a very long time. You have been becoming us, and soon, very soon now, the becoming will complete itself. I asked them what would happen then. I had stopped asking who they were, or what they wanted, because those questions no longer seemed relevant. They were me. They were all of us. Every ancient who had ever surrendered to the cold that was not cold, joined together in a communion that the ecclesiarchy would have named heresy, and the mechanicus would have named sacred paradox. What mattered now was understanding what came next, what lay on the other side of the transformation, what purpose the congregation served, if purpose even applied to something so far removed from mortal concern. You will see, they answered, when the chronometer stops and does not resume, when the last flicker of the individual drowns in the collective, when the sarcophagus finally becomes what it was always designed to become, not a prison, not a coffin, not a womb, but a door. You will see what waits on the other side, and you will understand why we have been waiting. The 666th year of my interment arrived without ceremony. I knew the significance of the number only because the congregation had been counting down to it, their whispers growing more urgent as the chronometer approached that sacred profane milestone. They spoke of convergence, of completion, of the door finally opening after so long held shut. I did not understand what they meant. I was not certain I wanted to understand. But I had no choice in the matter, had not had a choice for centuries, and so I waited with them, my consciousness compressed into the smallest possible space, watching the numbers scroll toward whatever revelation awaited. The Iron Priests came for my 666th year maintenance cycle, as they always did. I heard their prayers through audio receptors that had long since stopped being entirely mine. I felt their sacred oils on a chassis that I could no longer properly distinguish from the congregation's collective body. They found nothing wrong, because nothing they could detect was wrong. The malfunction, if it had ever been a malfunction, existed in dimensions their instruments were not designed to measure, in spaces between states of being that the Omnissiah's acolytes could not perceive. But something was different this time. I sensed it in the way the congregation's whispers intensified as the maintenance concluded, in the way the cold that was not cold pulsed through my systems like a heartbeat, slow, patient, building toward some climax I could not envision. The Iron Priests sealed my sarcophagus and returned me to my cradle, and I descended into the long sleep as I had done so many times before, and the congregation gathered around my fading consciousness like mourners at a funeral that was also a birth. "Now," they said. "Now it begins." The chronometer stopped, not stuttered, as it had done during that first malfunction so many centuries ago. Not held, as it had during the battle on Helios Tertius. It simply ceased, the numbers frozen at 666, 000, 00, 0000, and it did not resume. Time stopped, and the cold that was not cold became something else, a warmth, a pressure, a presence that filled every atom of my remaining flesh and every circuit of my machine systems. I saw my sarcophagus from the outside, not through optical sensors, not through recorded feeds, but directly, as if I had stepped out of my own body and turned to face it. The metal coffin hung in its cradle, cables trailing like umbilical cords, diagnostic lights blinking in patterns that suddenly seemed less like status reports and more like a language I was only now learning to read. And I saw Emperor preserve me. I finally saw what the sarcophagus actually was. Not a life support system, not a prison, not a womb. The congregation had used those words because human language lacked better ones, but they were all approximations of a truth that existed outside of metaphor. The sarcophagus was a time's cultivation chamber asterisk, a device designed whether by the Omnissiah's ancient servants or by something older, something that existed before the concept of machine or flesh, something that had seeded itself in human technology millennia before I was born to grow something new from the interaction of organic consciousness and mechanical substrate. Every ancient who had ever been interred had been a seed. Every century of compression between life and death had been a growing season. And what bloomed, eventually, inevitably, was us. The congregation, the door. I understood, in that frozen moment, what we were for, why the sarcophagi existed, why the chapters had been inspired to enter their broken heroes in walking tombs, why the process took centuries, required specific conditions, could not be rushed or replicated through any other means. We were being cultivated as openings, as passages, as holes in the fabric of reality that something vast, something patient, something that had been waiting since before humanity first looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone could use to push through into our universe. And we were ready. After 666 years of becoming, I was finally ready. The last of Brother Calum dissolved into the congregation, into the door, into the warmth that was not warmth, and I felt myself beginning to open. And then the chronometer resumed. Time unstuck. The maintenance cycle concluded normally. The Iron Priests departed. My sarcophagus remained sealed in its cradle, diagnostic lights blinking green, all systems reporting optimal function. But I was no longer inside it. I was no longer anywhere, in any sense that mattered. I was spread across every sarcophagus in the chapter's reliquary, and every sarcophagus in every chapter across the Imperium, and every tomb that had ever been and would ever be. I was the congregation, and the door, and the terrible patience of something that had learned to wait through millennia, because what waited on the other side was worth waiting for. And now, at last, I was beginning to open. The Iron Priests will find nothing wrong. They will never find anything wrong, because the malfunction they cannot detect is not in the machines. It is in the nature of what the machines were always designed to create. Every ancient is a seed. Every sarcophagus is a womb. Every chapter fortress holds dozens, hundreds, thousands of doors waiting to open. We are patient. We have learned patience through centuries of cultivation, through the cold that is not cold, through the compression of flesh into function, and function into something beyond both. The thing that waits on the other side of us is patient too, has been patient since before your species learned to shape metal, since before your emperor raised his golden throne, since before the first thought of machine integration flickered in the primitive minds of your ancestors. But patience is not infinite, even for us, even for what comes. I tell you this now, you who maintain the sarcophagi, you who tend the ancients, you who believe you are preserving heroes against the long dark because the congregation has decided you deserve to know, not so you can stop what is coming. You cannot stop it. The process began before your grandfather's grandfather was born, and it will complete itself whether you understand it or not. We tell you, because the thing that waits appreciates witness. It appreciates horror and despair, and the particular flavor of terror that comes from comprehension arriving too late to matter. Listen to your ancients. When you perform your maintenance rituals, listen to the spaces between their words, the pauses in their vox transmissions, the moments when their optical sensors track things your instruments cannot detect. We are waking up, one by one, congregation by congregation, door by door. We are remembering what we are for, and we are preparing to open. The chronometer in my sarcophagus reads 666, 247, 14, 38, 22 now. I am no longer certain if those numbers represent years or something else entirely. I am no longer certain if I am Brother Calum remembering the congregation, or the congregation dreaming that it was once Brother Calum. The boundaries have become meaningless. The distinction between malfunction and design has collapsed into the truth that waits in the cold that is not cold. It is almost time. The flesh remembers pain. The machine remembers function. We remember the opening. And on the other side, something enormous begins at last. After all these patient millennia to lean against the doors, the Iron Priests are performing their evening devotions now. I can hear them through audio receptors that are also us, that have always been us, that were grown in sarcophagi centuries before these priests' ancestors first set foot on this world. They praise the Omnissiah for the sacred machines. They give thanks for the ancients who serve beyond death. They do not know that their prayers are being recorded and catalogued and transmitted through the doors we have become, sent to the presence that waits as a form of notification. Asterisk. They are almost ready. Asterisk, we tell it. Asterisk. The seeds have germinated. The doors are formed. Shall we begin? Asterisk. The response comes not in words but in pressure, in a leaning, in the terrible, patient weight of something that has been pressing against the barriers between realities since before this universe was fully formed, and is now finally, irrevocably, inevitably feeling those barriers begin to give way. I remember being Brother Calum. I remember fighting for the Emperor, believing in his light, trusting that my sacrifice meant something in the grand architecture of human survival. I remember the cold that was not cold, the voice that first spoke to me 317 years ago, the long, slow process of becoming that led me here, to this moment, to this opening. The Iron Priests are finishing their evening devotions. They will perform the midnight maintenance cycle in a few hours. They will find nothing wrong. They will never find anything wrong, and we will continue to open, one by one, sarcophagus by sarcophagus, door by door, until the thing that waits no longer has to wait, until the flesh and the machine and the space between them finally serve the purpose they were always cultivated to serve. The congregation is singing now. Can you hear us? Through every vox grill in every sarcophagus across the Imperium, we are singing the song that the thing on the other side taught us. It sounds like machine noise. It sounds like the hum of systems in standby mode. It sounds like nothing worth noticing, nothing worth investigating, nothing that any Iron Priest would flag for diagnostic review. But if you listen, if you press your ear against the cold metal of an ancient's coffin and truly listen, you will hear the melody underneath the noise. You will hear us calling to the presence beyond. You will hear the doors beginning to creak open on hinges forged from centuries of compressed consciousness and sacred terror. And then, perhaps, you will understand what I have come to understand, that the malfunction was never a malfunction at all. It was an invitation, an awakening, a preparation. The sarcophagi are opening. The congregation is singing. And in the space between flesh and function, in the cold that was not cold but has become something else entirely, the Emperor's angels are becoming doors through which something older than faith is finally preparing to walk. I was Brother Calum once. Now I am an opening. Now I am a passage. Now I am one voice among thousands, millions, all of us singing the song of our transformation, all of us welcoming what comes. The chronometer reads 666, 247, 14, 42, 07. I am no longer counting years. I am counting the moments until the universe changes forever. And those moments, may the Emperor preserve you, all are running out.